Chantal, it's a great pleasure to have you here. It's an honor and a privilege, my dear friend. Of 8 years, I can't believe we already know each other that long. So welcome to this program of, where we try to change finance and finance change and do whatever we can to create the better future we all want. So welcome to the program.
Thank you so much, Mariana, and thank you for all the great work that you do to help, change, make this world a better place. we only can get there if we all work together. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you for making time out of your busy schedule to join us. So post-COVID-19, everyone asked the same question: how can we jumpstart the economy and avoid the previous regression post-financial crisis, now that we have the opportunity to transform the systems in a better way? So what are your ideas around that?
Yeah, well, I have so many ideas, as usual, right, Mariana? So let me start by where the UN, when we have crisis like this, what happens is, of course, creativity and people come together. So that's the positive side. And, the UN, usually each arm's doing its own thing, and we all came together to have a coherent socioeconomic response to the COVID-19. And of course, there's the immediate health reaction, so supporting health in all countries, but then also protecting people and their jobs, right? And that's the second major pillar. But then we get to the economic response and the recovery, which is of very importance here, and protecting the job of the small, medium-sized enterprises, informal workers, women that are really affected by the COVID-19, as well as the youth. And then as part of our response, we also have a macroeconomic response and multilateral response, because many of these problems, and we saw the economy of the world collapse within 2 months. And so that means we have systemic issues with our financial, economic, and trade system that need to be addressed. And so that's another piece of that socioeconomic response. And then, which is very interesting and heartening, is the social cohesion and community resilience that is needed. Because when at the beginning of COVID, country all went down, even the EU, everybody went down to nationalist, let's protect our own. And often that has come from the local communities. And so, and yet at the opposite, what we're observing is many governments are using this as an opportunity to crack down on these communities and the right to speak and the right to aggregate, to congregate. And so we felt it was really important, if we want to succeed, to support, as the UN system, the social cohesion and the community resilience. Another thing that came out that was very interesting, Mariana, is we have at the UN a group of friends on sustainable financing and financing the SDGs that was started by Canada and Jamaica, bringing different group of countries together. And then post-pandemic, I'm sorry, what they realized is that we need to actually take a different governance approach to many of these issues, because the way we've been doing through the G20, the G7, and at WTO, it's just stalled. It's not working, right? And so they basically use that group of friends on SDG financing to say, let's try a new governance model here. We know we need to look at global liquidity and financial stability, but instead of going to the G20 where we've not made some progress, why don't we create informal group of smaller and larger economies, as well as more developed and less developed economies, so we can come up with solutions that actually are appealing to everyone and actually can respond to the need of everyone. And so this group was just launched last week. And so it's going to be, we have 6 areas that will be co-chaired by 12 countries. And then all countries can actually contribute, and they're supported by the international community. So you love to hear these 6 areas, Mariana. Global liquidity and financial stability, as I just mentioned. Debt vulnerability, huge right now. Private sector creditor engagement. External finance for inclusive growth. Illicit financial flows. Imagine if all these billions of dollars that are being now in paradise, in tax haven, these countries could actually use those to invest in education and health and medicine. And the 6th one, recovering better for sustainability. And so we literally have a group, and no surprise, Mariana, that a lot of countries have signed up to that one. First of all, probably less political and easier, though it's not been easy, as we all know, for those of us that spent our career in that area, but easier anyway to basically bring idea. So it's a long answer to your question, but I do believe that, and then what we're going to do is, because people have been asking us at the UN, so does that mean then, Chantal Line, that the SDGs are now behind us and the 2030 agenda no longer is the roadmap that we have? And on the contrary, the Secretary General of the UN, my Secretary General of UNCTAD, have all said, if we had made more progress on the SDGs, on universal access to health, for instance, and universal social protection floor, we would not be where we are right now with this COVID-19 crisis. And so, on the contrary, we are redoubling on the SDGs as the roadmap and the guideposts for the recovery. And I was very heartened to know that the EU is basically basing their recovery package on their Green New Deal and their green. And so we hope, and there's several countries that have said they would do so, not enough, and we just need to keep pushing on that.
Wow, this is very, very empowering. Thank you so much for driving this and for sharing that with us. So from the finance innovation perspective, how can we implement these? What are the acupuncture points and the measurement criteria that would help make sure that these 6 areas are going to be implemented?
Yeah, and that's a very good point. So one is, for instance, there are some key weaknesses or key fault line that we have, right? One is, you know, no surprise here, Mariana, lack of diversity in decision making. And at least this structure is actually addressing one of them, which is developing countries being at the table. Now, I will hope, and so far we've seen that there's more women at the table as well. But we should also have people of colors and people of, you know, from First Nation. And the more diverse these groups will be, the more chance we have to have, first of all, all of the humanities creativity put to the service of humanity, but second, to come up with the innovation that we need and meet the needs of all people. We also need to scale up and accelerate the knowledge on experience on green and inclusive opportunities. There is not enough out there. So for instances, when we work, and then the third one, of course, is perception of risk in green, inclusive investment, as well as in developing countries, which are totally skewed, right? And so what we're trying to do, and we just issued our World Investment Report, and earlier in the year, we had our Financing for Development report that the whole UN work on. And there's a few concrete solutions that we put forward. One of them is we need to develop more sustainably themed capital market product dedicated to the SDGs and the recovery. So, Mariana, our Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative has documented that just in Q1 of 2020, we had more social bond issued related to COVID-19 than all of 2019 sustainability and social bond. This is a good trend, and we hope this is going to keep moving in that direction, right? Because it's so much easier with debt instrument like this to actually target them and into the real, especially in developing countries, in the areas where we need them. Now, what about flipping the burden of responsibility on the financial advisors and have them as mandated that they have to ask investors on their sustainable financing preferences? That would go a long way, because we need to change the demand as well, and not just the supply. Now, we're also working with the Global Investment for Alliance for Sustainable Development on a definition for what sustainable investing means. That's going to help also, because now we see a lot of things coming out, and it's not clear what is sustainable impact and not. So we need to have that definition as well. We're also working, especially at UNCTAD, on reorienting national investment promotion and facilitation strategies toward SDG investment, and working with the investment promotion agencies, the outbound one and inbound one, to help them, because they're not trained to develop these bankable projects that are sustainable, inclusive, and aligned with the SDGs. So working on training them, fast going forward quickly on this. Another area that we're working really is on regional SDG investment. Because oftentimes what happened, Mariana, you know, we have a very skewed foreign direct investment going to the small island developing countries, the LDCs, the LLDCs. First, they have small market, perceived risk is high. But if we could aggregate them into a regional and then have a fund that is regional, it would make it easier actually for the investors and for the recipient, because they could learn from one another. We also in that lane working on establishing special economic zone, as we had in the past, for investment, to facilitate investment. But in this case, that would be aligned with the SDGs and focus on circular economy. Because if you're going to have these special economic zone, it's much easier to aggregate if you are producing something and one of the waste from your production can be an input in my production, makes it so much easier. And then we can scale up learning as well. So we're thinking of all of these areas. Of course, what we're going to need is what? Make mandatory risk disclosure of climate related. But now I was just reading a report released yesterday from Sovereign Wealth Fund and Public Pension Fund, and they all failed the resilience test. Some of them did better on governance, some of them did better on sustainability, but we really need those to go a long way on the resilience and on the sustainability. And we need to change mindset. I am flabbergasted that we're still in our business school not teaching. We're teaching our student in business school for the 1 billion market that is the developed economy. And then we're basically saying, ignore the 5 billion. You know, we did a study that shows that only 12% of all business cases in business school worldwide are targeted towards developing countries. All the other ones. So this is to the 1 billion. And then 12% of the case studies are towards the 5 billion people. We're not teaching, we're teaching high margin, low volume. What about teaching also to address, going back to your innovation idea, these frugal innovation, bottom up, pro-poor innovation that would be low margin, high volume, and actually address all of these issues that the SDGs are trying to that we're trying to achieve with the SDGs. So sorry for going on this, but it's as you can tell, this is an area that we're both passionate about and been working on, and we need to put these ideas out there and get moving.
Well, that's thank you so much for summarizing. So let me make sure I understood. So one is the taxonomy, which gravitates around the implementation of the UN SDGs within planetary boundaries. Number two is the benchmarks. How do we measure that, you know, we're fulfilling the taxonomy and the requirements? Number three is the disclosures. And then, of course, that all supports the capital moving down to where it is needed.
And creating supply of these financial instruments that are aligned with this taxonomy, but also inciting the consumer, awareness of the consumer, so they demand more of these instruments as well.
Right, brilliant. And I totally agree with you that, you know, we need to scale. So, which brings us to the next topic, which is, of course, a passion of mine, that's entrepreneurship. And 90% of all businesses are small and medium enterprises, and not the big ones. And they are responsible for more than 55% of the GDP worldwide. And of course, the jobs that we desperately need to create right now. So how do you plan to de-risk? Because, you know, this is my passion, de-risking better criteria, integrating financial sustainability with people, planet, profit, the UN SDGs within planetary boundaries. What are your thoughts around that? How to better de-risk, particularly this, you know, the bottom at the pyramid? Yeah, and I think, you know, I'm not sure I can address the de-risk because I really think this is your expertise and not mine. But let me summarize a little bit. We just celebrated the International Day of Small Medium Enterprises on the 27th, and we had a celebration on the 25th. And a few things that came out is, first, finally, after all this time, after the COVID-19, all of the government around the world have finally realized that they create, as you said, 60 to 70% of the job, 50% of GDP, 95% of the enterprises, so they can't be ignored. So thank God, we're there. Now the question is, what do we do? And so some of the proposals that were put forward during the International Day celebration was, on the one hand, we need to help them go back to work safely.
So we need to provide them the tool. They're not the large multinational that can actually have all these tools in hands. So we're working in developing those tools with our colleagues at ILOs and others. So that's on the one hand. Second is, of course, how do we protect, how do we make it the financial burden on them, right? And I was heartened to see that in the US, the first wave of stimulus package was mainly done through the traditional banks. And they basically mostly did not reach SMEs. The second wave of the stimulus package was they actually used the fintech. And many of the fintech that were used actually were able to reach the MSMEs and give these small but so important grant of the, you know, on average $28,000. They were a loan that can be converted in grant depending on conditions, and with guarantees from the government. They were able to reach the MSMEs that the bank could not reach, but even MSMEs that didn't have relation with them, and be able to establish these relations, because we all know the SMEs have been kind of behind in that digitalization of the economy and getting, but this is kind of forcing them to do it, accelerating that. And so the fintech really holds a great, so one of the company was basically lending them on their balance sheet. Now, another thing that came out from the meeting was, can we just do them a favor and stop penalizing an MSMEs? And could the multinational pay them on invoice instead on 30 days or 60 days terms? I mean, there's so many things that we can actually, that would de-risk by just being more cognizant of the value, and they're the social fabric of our community, so we have to support them. Now, I also have bad news that many of them will not survive the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown. Many of them owned by women that were smaller, and so what are we going to do about that, right? And how can we help them, provide them the retraining and the capacity to develop their next generation businesses? So these are some of the things that came out from that meeting. We all know that only 2% of VC money goes to women-owned companies in the US. If you're a woman of color, it's less than 0.05%. We need dedicated funds that go to women-owned companies, that goes to MSMEs, and even one of the ideas that came up is an international fund, and then more granular one at the regional and national level, fund that already there with windows for women, windows for different issues. As soon as a crisis hit, because this is not the first nor the last pandemic we're going to have. We have financial crisis. The volatility of the market is increasing. We need to have measures in place to support these MSMEs as soon as the crisis hit, so they can actually turn around and keep those jobs and keep these salaries being paid.
Wow, that sounds so empowering. I'm so happy to hear that from you. So moving forward, what are partnerships, for instance, that we could support developing that could help this implementation? What are your ideas? With whom should we partner with? And what can, for instance, Silicon Valley do? Technology, that's extremely important. We all know that, without technology, we don't have this conversation. So what kind of partnerships should we request and develop?
Well, I think there's several of them. So one of them is, so far we focus on MSMEs as, oh, they create jobs and they create economic growth, and that's wonderful. But MSMEs are more nimble, more creative, and they can actually pivot more easily than multinational and larger company. So what if we were to develop a partnership between the business school, the financial system, the international organization, and empower them to be able to provide the innovation and the solution to achieve the SDGs? The million of people that don't have access to modern energy, the millions of people without access to sanitation, education, health, and empower them to be so, at the one hand, they can actually develop their business. On the other hand, they actually help us solve our problem, right? And we address the issues of inequality. So what would that take? Well, we need business school to teach the bottom of the pyramid type approach and the low margin, high volume that we discussed earlier. Then we need a financial sector to help us. But we also, to actually ensure that they have access to this capital, to invest in these markets that are perceived as being, and sometimes they're just perceived, sometimes they're more risky, sometimes are just perceived as more risky. And then the third pillar of this is oftentimes, we used to have, a coal power plant. So the Ministry of Energy would go to the World Bank, ask for a few $1 million loan, and then basically there's 3 or 4 partners, and they build the power plant and the grid, and that's it. Now with the decentralized electricity, decentralized solution, the ecosystem is much broader than it used to be. You have the local communities, the foundation, the international community, you have the investors, innovator, the engineer, and you need all these people to come together. And typically the engineer that develop the solution are not the best one at interacting with other people. So how do we create these ecosystems? And I believe that the Silicon Valley and the Cambridge of the world also tend to develop these technologies that may be less adapted for developing countries, for those markets, but they do have the business and financial solution for scaling that in developing countries may have more adapted solution, but not those business. So how do we bring this together? So we have the right, affordable, reliable solution that can actually be financed and scaled. And right now we're not there. So that's my dream of getting that done.
Yeah, I have the same dream. Yeah, and because it's basically breaking out breaking the silo thinking, which is
exactly.
Yeah, we need more people who have the ability to think in a complex way and also provide solution from a complex perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know that, Mariana, regarding that, what's interesting about the SDGs, because a lot of people are like, well, will that work? And they're so ambitious. And there's a few things to be said when we go back to the silos. One is every 4 years, for the first time in our lifetime, all of our heads of state have to be briefed on sustainable development. That's an achievement in itself. And that's not, that's helping. Second, 155 countries now prepared a voluntary national review and presented to the world at the high-level political forum that will start next week. And that means, and many of these countries, as they start doing their consultation with their constituencies and developing plan, create new institutions that break the silos, because by doing that, they realize they won't get there if they just talk to the energy ministry on energy, education to education ministry. And so they create oftentimes right under the president or the prime minister, an institutional structure that is, their job is to actually bring all of the line ministries together, the private sector, the NGOs, and all the groups, the relevant stakeholders together to come to this solution. And that really, really gets me excited and give me hope that we will get there. It's going to take time, but these can have transformational changes in the way we think and the way we develop policies that are truly green and inclusive.
Which brings us to the mind shift conversation that you named earlier. That's how the mind shift changes. So last question. I know you've got to go, and thank you for your generosity with time and ideas and wisdom. So what are your most important wishes that if they were fulfilled, within the next 10 years, we will create the future that we all want on this planet?
Well, as you know, since we've met, I'm very I think that the work that you guys have done and the Club of Rome has done, and these 5 areas that you've identified are key. Massive investment in decarbonization and renewable energy, agriculture, nutritious and sustainable agricultural and food, and inequality, addressing gender equality and general inequality, and then the economic model. That's exactly what we're talking about. But for years, we kept hearing that we don't have the money to do this and we don't have the resources. Well, guess what? We just added $7.8 trillion dump on our economy, so to speak. That was helicopter drop. And so we have that money. So we just need to make sure we put pressure on our decision makers. And I was just on a webinar with the Youth Council of Canada with two of our Minister of the Environment and Youth and Indigenous people on Sunday. And that's exactly what we were talking about. How can the youth put pressure on our decision makers so that this crisis doesn't go to waste, and that actually these massive investments are actually going into decarbonization, renewable energy, sustainable agriculture. But there's a few others, right? We're going to need a standstill on debt and on rating agencies. You saw that Canada basically put all this money to support the population and our people, and the rating agency just degraded our rating, making it more difficult and more expensive for Canada to borrow money. We should probably start thinking about, we're in a world crisis here. Should we really have the rating agencies start downgrading countries? That's right. We need to remove fossil fuel, fisheries, and agricultural subsidies. Now's the time. Look, we won't have the money. Let's remove them and put them towards green subsidies for agriculture, green subsidies for renewable, and green subsidies for fisheries as well. We need to price externalities. And so until we do that, we're not going to have the cost of our goods and services will not reflect the true cost of society. We need to use procurement policies to help our MSMEs, I believe, and ensure that our pension fund and our sovereign wealth fund are actually going in the same direction as we do, and help us invest in research and development in nature-based solution that will actually help us get there, and get more women in the decision making.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you saw our Deputy Secretary General had a speaking engagement 2 days ago, and she literally said, following a few readouts she had on women economists and some of the stellar performance of some of our heads of state that happen to be women, that she started a series of women economists to come up with new solutions to the issues. So another good step in the right direction. So.
Wonderful. Well, may all your and our wishes become true. Thank you so very much for your generosity, your time, your wisdom, your golden nuggets. I really, really appreciate you being on the program. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mariana, and thank you for the work you do. And, you know, let's all work together. We can do this, but we can do it together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye-bye.